Let me start with something uncomfortable. The next global shock isn't going to look like 2008. There won't be collapsing banks on TV, there won't be dramatic emergency meetings, there won't be a single day where everything suddenly breaks. And that's exactly why most people won't see it coming. Because this time, it won't feel like a crisis. It'll feel like life getting slightly worse, month after month, decision after decision. Things won't collapse, they'll just stop working the way they used to. You'll notice it in small ways at first. Bills that don't quite make sense anymore, options that quietly disappear, rules that change without announcements. Nothing dramatic enough to panic, nothing obvious enough to protest. And that's the dangerous part. Because when a shock looks boring, people don't react. They adapt. They assume it's temporary. They assume it's personal. They assume they just need to adjust a little more. Until one day they look back and realize the system they trusted isn't the same one anymore. What makes this moment different isn't how bad it looks, it's how normal it feels. And if that sentence made you uncomfortable, good, because that discomfort is exactly where this story begins. If you've been feeling like something's off lately, you're not imagining it. A lot of people feel it, but almost no one knows how to describe it. It's not panic. It's not a clear crisis. It's more like a low-level pressure that never fully goes away. Life feels tighter. Decisions feel heavier. Things that used to feel normal now feel risky. And the confusing part is this: nothing official seems wrong. The headlines say things are stable. Markets are resilient. Institutions insist everything is under control. So when you feel uneasy, it's easy to assume the problem is you. Maybe you're overthinking. Maybe you're being dramatic. Maybe everyone else has it figured out and you missed something. Most people stop there. They don't question the system, they question themselves. And that's exactly what makes this moment so strange. Because when millions of people feel the same pressure at the same time, but can't point to a single cause, that usually means the cause isn't obvious. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, and it doesn't come with an announcement. It just shows up as confusion, as hesitation, as that constant feeling that you're one step behind no matter how hard you try to keep up. And no one really talks about it. Not because it's imaginary, but because it's hard to explain without sounding paranoid. So people stay quiet. They adapt. They normalize the discomfort until it becomes the background noise of everyday life. Here's the part that usually gets skipped. This kind of pressure doesn't come from nowhere. It doesn't appear randomly. And it doesn't spread this evenly by accident. Systems don't drift like this for years without a cause. When life starts feeling harder across different countries, different jobs, different generations, that's not coincidence. That's structure. But most explanations never talk about structure. They focus on symptoms. They point at inflation, or interest rates, or housing, or wages, or politics. Each one sounds plausible on its own, but none of them explain why all of this is happening at the same time. It's like trying to understand a machine by staring at one loose screw. You're shown pieces, but never the mechanism connecting them. And that's why so many people feel stuck. They sense there's a logic behind what's happening, but every explanation feels incomplete. Here's what makes this tricky. Once you start explaining the structure too early, people tune out. It sounds technical. It sounds abstract. It feels distant. So most content either oversimplifies or overwhelms. We're not going to do either, because this isn't as complex as it's made to sound, but it does require looking at the system differently, not as a series of isolated problems, but as a pattern. And once you see that pattern, everything that feels confusing right now starts lining up. That's the shift we're about to make. Let's slow this down for a moment. Because despite how chaotic everything feels, what's happening actually follows a very simple logic. Not easy, but simple. The problem isn't that the world suddenly broke, and it's not that everything went wrong at once. It's that the system we've been living inside quietly changed how stability is created, without ever explaining the new rules. And once those rules change, the outcomes stop being random. They become predictable. That's why this doesn't feel like a normal downturn, and it doesn't feel like something that will just reset. There's a structure underneath all of this, and once you see it, the confusion starts to fade. You don't need charts, you don't need economic jargon, and you definitely don't need to be an expert. You just need to understand what the system is actually built to reward, and what it quietly stopped rewarding along the way. That's what we're going to unpack. Not in slogans, not in politics, not in abstractions, just the structure, step by step. Because when you understand the structure, you stop reacting emotionally to every headline and start seeing why this moment feels different. Most explanations stop at the same place. They say, people don't work as hard anymore. Standards dropped. Discipline disappeared. Entitlement culture. And on the surface, that sounds convincing. Because when life feels harder, when stability feels further away, it's easy to assume effort is the missing piece. But that explanation collapses the moment you look closer. People didn't stop trying. If anything, most people feel like they're doing more hours, more side hustles, more credentials just to stay in the same place. And yet, the pressure keeps increasing. That tells us something important. The problem isn't effort. The problem is that effort is no longer what the system rewards. The rules didn't fail, they changed, and most people are still playing by the old ones. This isn't about laziness, it's about misalignment. A system can look functional while quietly punishing the behaviors that used to create stability. And when that happens, hard work doesn't disappear. It just stops working the way it used to. That's the shift most people feel but struggle to name. Here's the part most people don't expect. This isn't the first time effort stopped being rewarded the way people were promised. And it's not unique to this decade, or this country, or this generation. This exact shift has happened before. Not once, not twice, but repeatedly, whenever systems grow large, complex, and dependent on things that aren't immediately visible. When stability stops coming from production and starts coming from structure. When access matters more than contribution. When position matters more than effort. Every time that transition happens, the same pressures appear. People work harder but feel poorer. Rules feel stricter, but outcomes feel less fair. Stability feels conditional, like it could disappear at any moment. And what's dangerous about this phase is that it never announces itself. There's no headline that says, "The system just changed." It feels gradual, technical, boring. Until years later, when people look back and say, "Wait, when did this stop working?" That's why history matters here. Because when you line these moments up, you start seeing the same shape, even if the tools look different. And once you see that shape, this moment stops feeling random. Let's look at this pattern in action. Not with charts, not with textbooks, just with history doing what it always does. Take late imperial Rome. People didn't suddenly stop working. In fact, many worked more just to survive. But the system had shifted. Money lost value. Taxes increased. The rewards for effort shrank. The middle of society, the people holding everything together, felt pressure from every direction. Now jump forward. Early modern Spain. An empire flooded with silver, global power, enormous influence, and yet productive work slowly stopped mattering. Debt replaced production. Future wealth was spent in advance. The system looked rich, but the people inside it felt poorer. Move again. Pre-revolutionary France. Debt funded prestige and power. The structure looked stable, The surface looked calm, but underneath, the people doing the actual work were being squeezed harder every year. Different countries, different centuries, different tools, same feeling. Effort stops translating into security, stability becomes fragile, and pressure concentrates in the middle. That's the pattern. And once you see it, this moment stops feeling unique. Here's the key detail most people miss. What changes over time isn't the outcome, it's the tool used to get there. Rome diluted its coins. Spain borrowed against future silver. France printed paper. Britain perfected debt markets. Different technologies, different eras, same pressure. Because the mechanism underneath stays the same. When a system starts relying on future promises instead of present productivity, effort slowly disconnects from reward. Debt becomes the bridge, not as a temporary fix, but as a permanent structure. And once debt becomes structural, something subtle happens. The system no longer needs to grow in a healthy way, it just needs confidence. As long as payments continue, as long as trust holds, as long as the math doesn't break yet. That's why these systems can look stable for a long time, even while pressure quietly builds underneath. And that's also why, when the strain finally shows up, it doesn't feel dramatic at first. It feels boring, administrative, technical. But the effect is always the same. More pressure on those who work, more protection for those closest to money itself, and fewer exits for everyone else. This is the moment where history stops being abstract and starts touching real lives. When systems like this take over, the results aren't random. Some people actually do very well. Not because they're smarter, not because they work harder, but because they're positioned differently. When debt becomes central, the winners are the ones closest to money itself. Banks don't fear debt. They sell it, they manage it, they profit from it. Financial institutions don't panic when things get unstable. They price instability. Volatility isn't a threat, it's a business model. Asset holders don't watch their wealth shrink. They often watch it inflate. When money loses value, assets quietly gain it. And governments? They benefit too. Debt becomes easier to manage when its real value erodes. Old obligations shrink quietly. Pressure gets pushed forward, onto the future. Nothing illegal, nothing secret, nothing dramatic, just incentives doing what incentives always do. The system doesn't reward effort here, it rewards access. And once access matters more than work, the rules of the game quietly change without anyone announcing it. This is where the divide begins.
And then there's everyone else. The people who did what they were told. Work hard, be responsible, save, plan, delay gratification. The people who believed stability was something you earned. They're the ones who lose. Because when effort stops being the thing the system rewards, the people built around effort are the first to feel it. Savings lose value quietly. Wages lag behind reality. Costs rise faster than explanations. And the finish line keeps moving. Not dramatically, not overnight, just enough that you start questioning yourself. Maybe I should have tried harder. Maybe I chose the wrong path. Maybe I fell behind. But this isn't a personal failure. It's structural. When debt becomes the engine, when access matters more than contribution, when stability depends on position instead of work, the middle gets squeezed. Not because anyone hates them, but because the system doesn't need them the way it used to. And that's the part nobody says out loud. Because once you see that, you stop asking how to catch up and start asking a much more dangerous question. If working hard no longer leads to stability, if following the rules doesn't protect you, if the pressure keeps rising no matter what you do, then what exactly is this system asking from you now? And more importantly, who is it really built for? That's not a question with a comfortable answer, but it's the one more people are starting to feel, even if they can't quite put it into words yet.